Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam. This is a podcast for people who love to read and who read to escape into worlds of magic and adventure. But don't let that adventure end when you finish your book.
Join us on Escapists Anonymous to carry on the conversation. And we are back, episode 26. Blimey, that means
26?
It's 26. That means we've been doing this for over a year. We didn't even celebrate, but happy anniversary, Sam.
Wow, how time flies.
I know.
Yeah, of course, we do it every 2 weeks. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Bloomin' heck.
What an achievement. Every 2 weeks for a year. That's good going.
I feel like I've read a lot, but also not nearly enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Just struggling to keep up. But we've covered a lot. And this week we are covering a whole book, another whole book review. And we're going to tie this in. We were reading this over the month of March, and March contains the Irish national celebration, St. Patrick's Day. As an Irish citizen myself, I was
taking a lot of inspiration. And as a Viking invader of a Viking heritage, this is very on point for this book.
Indeed. So we read The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. And this is the first book in a trilogy. The name of the trilogy...
We're reading a first book in a trilogy. That's a bit different.
Never finish a trilogy. That's our motto on this podcast. But maybe one day we will.
Furthest we've got is 2.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. We'll get there eventually. Get there eventually. We just keep having our heads turned by new, exciting looking front covers. And this is no different. I absolutely loved the front cover of this. And there's a green version of it as well, which I think I saw in the shops that attracted my attention.
I think the sequel might be green, or is it blue as well? Because that one's out as well.
I think there's various versions of it, paperback, hardback, etc. As we do with all of our new books, new book, new blurb, just to get a sense of what the publicists wanted us to think of this book when we picked it up.
It's amazing how our interpretation of the blurb has come in like, this is what's going to be in the book, to this is what they want you to think. These liars.
Indeed.
So, they think they've killed the last of us. 981 AD. The Viking king of Dublin is dead. His widow, Gormla, has ambitions for herself and her son. But Ireland is a dangerous place, and kings tend not to stay kings for long. Gormla has also a secret. She is a Fomorian, an immortal who can do fire magic. She has kept her powers hidden, for there are other immortals in this world, like let's put the Irish word in it, Tuatha De Danann warriors who are sworn to kill Fomorians. Fola is one of the Tuatha De Danann with the gift of healing. Her kind are forbidden to live amongst the mortals. When Fola agrees to help her kin by spying on Brian Boru, a powerful man who aims to be High King of Ireland, she finds a land on the brink of war, one she is desperate to stop. Yet preventing the loss of mortal lives is far from easy, with Ireland in turmoil and the Fomorians on the rise. I hadn't read that before.
Well, first of all, given that you didn't read the audiobook, I'm going to say congratulations on the pronunciations of the names, because even as an Irish citizen with Irish family, when listening to the audiobook and then going back and doing some notes and reading through and thinking, oh, how are they spelling these things? Gormla, especially.
Gormflaith.
Well done on that. I think you did a really good job.
Thank you. No, it took me numerous references to the characters glossary.
I mean, you've got that mix of the Irish stuff and the Viking influence, haven't you? So like citric and stuff, which all the way through the audiobook narration, I was thinking that must be Cedric. But then when I read it, it was citric.
But you can see where the names have kind of similar origins and all that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, like in Old English, for age. Whenever I saw a C at the start of the name, I thought hard K or maybe a C, but so many of them are ch,
Yeah.
like Cholwolf, Cherditch, and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
it's not like Old English names are any easier sometimes.
Indeed.
But yeah, so with this blurb, the perspective shifts, doesn't it? They think they've killed the last of us. So you think this book is going to focus on Gormla, like primarily, and it's her perspective and her survival. But then, of course, it shifts to being about the Tuatha De Danann and about how some of the Fomorians are, implied that they're evil. And because I hadn't read that blurb prior to this, when I started reading this book, and of course it was a smart move from Shauna Lawless to open with the first chapter of from Gormla's perspective. I'm like, oh, here we go. This is the protagonist. And it genuinely took me a little while to go, hold on. She might be slightly antagonistic in her approach to going about things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I think overall the blurb is just very misleading altogether. Like, I would read that, and I'm sure I probably did, stood in a Waterstone somewhere, and think that this was a book about the Fomorians being hunted down by the descendants. And that wasn't really a narrative in the book, save for a couple of bits where Gormla is paranoid that Thomas comes to Dublin.
Yeah.
But there isn't really a plot line of I'm being hunted down.
No, it kind of just serves as a reason as to why Gormla can't use her magic. Because she's like, oh, I wanted to go over to that fire and yum it up, but I couldn't in case there was a descendant nearby.
Yeah.
But it just felt like that, like this kind of like just this general kind of like threat around as the reason why you can't do any wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of inserted into the story as like a limitation on her power. So she can't just be all powerful and use her power because, this slight threat to her existence exists. But like reading that blurb, you would think this is the core central plot, and I wonder whether that becomes the core central plot in book 2 and 3.
And this is again that thing of like when you've pretty much started off writing a trilogy from page 1 of the first book, and that all 3 of them are going to be turned into books. It's not like, oh, we'll see how the first one goes. That is like, this is selling you the trilogy rather than selling you this one book. Because, as you say, none of that really comes to pass. And, like, the Brian Boru stuff, does she really spy on Brian Boru? Like, who does she report back to? Like, there's Coleman, like, once. Maybe Gobnat once. It's not like that's her main thing. It's, they kind of send her out there, and Folo is quite useless.
She's just kind of got her own motivations throughout it, hasn't she? Which is like my survival, the survival of my nephew. I just trying to find some safety, and she sort of stumbles into like the Brian Boru's camp.
Yeah, they're like, you need to go there, and they're like, but you can only heal one person to get in there, and it's like that's really short-sighted, because what if the one person she chose, and they were like, an amazing healer, you must heal all of our other wounded, and she's like, oh, I can't do that.
It's like another arbitrary limitation.
Yeah, luckily I spaffed it out on just that woman giving birth. So, and how lucky that turned out that Merca was just kind of coming by at the time being like, oh, saved a baby. Very good.
Yeah.
Come on, because I'm a lovely bloke. Come with me.
Yeah.
Because she could have done that and nothing ever came of that. And she was just like being such a useless spy. She's been like, well, I guess I'll just never get in with them.
But she doesn't really want to spy. Like I found Fowler more compelling as a kind of protagonist than Gormla. And again, like you said, we're not sure that Gormla is a out and out protagonist.
Yeah.
Albeit I've kind of found that I was still cheering for her and wanted her to succeed and wanted her plots and her scheming to kind of come good. But yeah, I found like Fowler I found her in a conflict sort of believable.
Yeah, I mean,
a bit more so.
I found it. I could understand it, but also there was quite an arbitrariness to it. Like, again, similar to how Gormla can't use her fire magic, Fola's told you can only heal once to also limit her ability to do magic. And so, like, I don't know, I feel like Fola was like out there to do good. Gormla, survival. Absolute survival every step of the way. And I kind of enjoyed seeing her perspective, even though it was the slow drip feed of her just saying really horrible stuff inside her head. Like, everyone's ugly or stupid or, like, you know, just beneath her.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this isn't the thinking of a particularly nice person. Whereas Fola, she thinks the worst of humanity because of the toxic nature of her relationship with Thomas. And you can see her slowly getting better, whereas Gormla is potentially just going to keep getting worse. But
yeah, Fola's on kind of a journey of enlightenment, isn't she? Having come from the sanctuary of Fennet Island, but like there's a real sort of brain. Is it a brainwashing or is it a genuinely held belief that humans are destined to destroy each other and they are incapable of, you know, any redeeming qualities?
Knowing how hostile, you know, how warlike, you know, humanity is, sure, a perfectly valid perspective, but it's also for the descendants to act like they're above it is the thing that really irked me the most, because Thomas is like, oh, they're savages. Oh, the way they war and fight. Also, Fola, I'm going to be really kind of mildly abusive towards you, and that's okay because I'm a descendant. Like the bit where he's just like, oh, yes, and he brushes back some of her hair and then holds her hand and then suddenly grips it really tight, being like, by the way, I know that you healed that man at the battle site. And she's like, ow, it hurts. He's like, oh, I'm only doing this because I love you. And it's like, oh, okay, you need to leave. Get out.
Yeah.
Come on.
And we know he basically held his daughter prisoner on the island until she died. And like I don't think they're supposed to be the good guys at all here.
No, but I mean, it's just interesting because, of course, you know, and this is something I was going to have to bring up at some point. Like, I didn't realise this was as historical fiction as it was until about 2/3 through the book. And I was just like, that Brian Boru name, that does sound familiar beyond just the fact that I've been hearing it since the start of this book. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is history. This is actually like really close to history.
As I think I mentioned to you, you know, I have been told that my family are descendants of King Brian Boru, and I have no reason to doubt that. And, you know, there were 150 kings at a time and only a population of 500,000. Each king had, say, 4 or 5 wives. Think about the number of children. It's probably actually pretty plausible that you are a descendant of a king if you have
pretty inevitable, actually.
You know, Irish family. So it is great. I love the fact that it was a real kind of historical, I think, as much as possible historically accurate, and we know we can see that the plot is very much guided by these sort of points in time. We jump through years to kind of
to some like major pinch points in the story,
and but also the character. So like Gormla is, you know, she is a character in history. She's the mother of King Citric, and there's not much known about her. And I couldn't find anything on Fola as a real character in history, but Brian Boru's son, who is Mirka, wasn't it?
Yeah,
he is a real son of Brian Boru. But I like the fact that some of these characters that we're getting more detailed insights of are characters that there isn't really much known about.
No.
So Shauna Lawless has obviously, like, I think, picked and chosen characters where there's a little bit of scope to build some mysticism and magic around them.
And with Gormla and her brother Melmorda, like, both of them are really good because they mess stuff up. Like, you know, like I read about what, you know, the kind of like the politicking they were doing. And of course, like, the way women are depicted in history is often as schemers, but some of the way she's switching allegiances and all this kind of stuff, I was like, oh yeah, no, she was definitely like, I could see why she was drawn to these siblings as these two people who were just causing war, big fights, you know, forcing the King of Dublin to go to war for his own, selfish ends. Melmorda, like, cowardly. You know, I thought they were good choices, but yeah, like, you know, but then also, like, you know, the Fomorians and the Descendants were also, you know, ancient, you know, religion of Ireland as well. And, you know, I looked at what the Fomorians are, I was like, they're supposed to be like hideous elemental beasts. And, you know,
really?
the Descendants are like, oh, they're technically like angels and descended from the original gods. And so, like, you know, that taking it from that, a real kind of good versus evil kind of situation, and making it a lot more grey to fit it within the historical context, I thought was really interesting. And like, to make the Fomorians like not these hideous creatures, but just like personally, upon personality level, they're hideous. It's like, no, it's their inner hideousness that's so repellent about them, because they're so selfish and they hate all ugly people.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it just made a lot more sense. Like, if you'd have had straight up good and evil, it wouldn't have worked within this time period, because, you know, while Brian Boru and Merca seem to be the most outwardly good people, they're still doing some sus stuff and having to kind of like be a bit morally compromised in order to achieve their aims. And, you know, you can't have been like, oh, well, this side's just good and this side's just bad, without feeling like you're kind of giving short shrift to the actual historical events.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I hadn't read as far into the Fomorians and the Descendants stuff, but I like that it's kind of building in a little bit more of a nuanced look at perhaps something quite traditional and perhaps sort of folk fairy tale-y, which you know, that's brilliant.
And blending those two elements as well, it makes sense why Shauna Lawless toned down the magic. But because, you know, I'm sure there are some people reading this going, well, it's barely fantasy. Because,
well, I thought that, yeah.
But, you know, you have immortals, you have some magic. I mean, like, Gormla barely uses hers. Like, she blasts a ship.
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing she did. Other than that, she's just lighting candles. And then Fola heals someone, a couple of people from the brink of death. You know, her whole magical ugliness stuff.
Yeah.
And talking to wind. So it's all very subtle stuff. And I kind of like, you know, because it does have almost the verge of, you know, this Tolkien kind of, oh, it's the end of the age of magic. You know, and you see that quite a lot. Thematically, I think throughout the book, you feel like this is the passing of the old ways. You know, because you've got the fact that the Descendants have retreated to a single island, and they're like, we don't go out anymore. It's like, oh yeah, you're kind of resigned to just being extinct, even though you know, your whole reason is to fight the Fomorians, or is it to influence human history, or have you kind of got so stuck in your ways you're no longer achieving what you wanted to do, and then you're down to two Fomorians potentially, and you know, so it is just like those last gasps of this long lost magical other time.
Yeah, and I think kind of picking up on that with the Descendants, I don't think it was really ever made clear what their actual motivations are. If the broader storyline is going to be about the Descendants versus the Fomorians, we don't get a kind of explanation of why, like what the background is of that. And we know that they're very interested in kind of spying on humans and stuff, but
to what end?
Yeah, like, what are you going to, as soon as there's an opportunity for Fola, who actually ingratiates herself to the king and Merca and finds herself in a position of influence, especially with Merca, it's like, no, get out of there, come home, like, give up. And I'm like, okay, well, why bother even finding out what's going on if you're just going to withdraw?
It's probably because they were like, oh, it's getting hot out there, and Fola is the one we've sent, and that's not a good choice because she's not going to be able to handle herself. That's probably what they thought. But yeah, it does make me like, yeah, is the question of what's their actual motivation that Fola doesn't know about, Or is it that Sean Lawless hasn't really imbued them with an actual direction? Because you're right, if they're going out and spying, we have no idea really what their ultimate goal is, because they don't want to influence human history.
Yeah.
They just want to observe it and then retreat back to Fenner Island and go, bloomin' heck, those humans are cocking it up again, aren't they? Let's carry on doing nothing.
Is Thomas just seeking reassurance that humans are dreadful?
I made the right call.
Yeah, told you.
Yeah. What's that? We're dying out, and we're being like, we just this kind of like rump ass of the angels. Cool. That's all our existence is, then, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I think, the Descendants are a really interesting bunch, because I want to know more about them. We kind of got introduced to a whole set of like witches, healers, musicians, all these people with amazing skills. So I think I'm so curious about what that actually turns out that their motivations are. Because, either I feel like they're underdeveloped by Sean Lawless, or they're intentionally vague for further reveals. Again, it was one of those things where we have to read the next book or the third book to find out what's truly going on. And it could be either very good or, a bit disappointing. But so it just means that I'm kind of like wondering why, like, and it just feels like there's arbitrariness all going all over the place. Like, we've just passed these new rules, and you can't have kids with the humans, and so you've got to take this kid to go be raised by humans because we say so, and we're barely going to check up on you, but you have to do it. I can totally see Fowler in the next book or the third book going, oh, sod this. Like, humans aren't so bad, and it's not like the Descendants are these perfect people. They're just really closed off, cloistered, arrogant beings.
Yeah.
And I can see why they keep, most of their spies are placed in monasteries and nunneries, because it's like, well, they're holier than thou people. They probably feel right at home.
Yeah. And I guess, obviously, we have the epilogue at the end with Fowler's sister, Rona. And actually, for my money, I know she was only really in it for the first sort of portion, but she was kind of the most interesting character. And I'm kind of hoping, if we get onto book 2, I'm hoping from what happened in that epilogue that she features a bit more in it. She has this kind of much more holistic view of the world.
Yeah,
I think,
because she's clearly spent more time out in the world. Like, when you see Fowler kind of running to the convent to try and find her sister, you feel like she's not really been living amongst humans very often. Whereas Rona has like been out there, doing stuff. And as a result, her punishment at the hands of Thomas is kind of the inciting incident that's always going to be called back to by Fowler when she questions whether she truly believes in what the Descendants are doing. Because she'll say, like, well, if they're truly good and Rona didn't really do anything wrong, why am I on the side of the people who punished her?
Yeah.
I would also say that Fowler, like, her trying to follow Thomas's thing of like, be scared of humans, they're all horrible, all the men want to attack you, almost leads her to starve the child to death, because everyone's like, your kid's so skinny, stop avoiding humans because you don't get anything to eat. And it was just that kind of like that, the kind of background detail that shows how much she's willing to push this, because I'm sure she'd much rather that Brocken be well-fed and healthy, but instead she's forcing him to like just the borderline of starvation.
Yeah. It's interesting. So it was quite a grim read. Like, overall, like there's no laughs in this book, I think, is maybe what I would say is as a first sort of, if you're looking for a book that's maybe got a few laughs in it, this is not probably the book for you.
Yeah. The lighter moments seem to be within the context of history. One of those ones where they make a joke that at the time would have been quite humorous, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, history.
Yeah. But it's, I think I sort of, I raise that because you've got to have something, I think, in this that sort of draws you in. And I think there were times that I really was enjoying reading this where maybe there was a little bit more of a kind of human interaction thing, and I think that's why I found Fowler more compelling. But I think I struggled at times because I was like, Christ, this is so miserable. Like where are we ending up here? Like, I want to feel like there's a chance of some,
Yeah, I didn't feel like the that going back to the blurb, like the inevitable slide towards war. I didn't feel that reading the book necessarily, because what I got was Gormla being like, I'm just struggling to survive. I'm playing people off against one another. I'm just living from moment to moment, cursing my son whenever he doesn't go my way. I'm one wrong conversation away from being stabbed, and having everything unravel in front of me. And that felt a bit full on. But yeah, Fowler, when she the first bit, I felt a bit detached from Fowler because I didn't really get what her motivation was. I didn't relate to her in any way. And it was only when she started to hang out with Mirka and, and get into the human motivation, have that connection, where I was like, oh, I'm more into your storyline now. That kind of grew on me. Gormla, like I say, it was full on, but I felt like I connected with her early on because I understood where she was going. Like they almost even have that chant of marry, breed, move on. I was like, got it. I know what you want.
Yeah. See, that's interesting because I think the story of Fowler's daughter, Fowler and Thomas's daughter, who didn't end up being an immortal and, grew old and died in front of them, was this kind of quite heartbreaking thing that I felt kind of connected you a bit more to Fowler than to Gormla, who had this sort of quite mercenary thing going on in the sort of rinse and repeat kind of marriage breed, manipulate, move on type of lifestyle. But also I felt like because of Rona, there's a kind of more humanizing element to Fowler because she wants to believe that her sister wouldn't have these sort of more, shall we call them, liberal views of humanity without good reason. And she's drawn by that family tie to place some trust in her. But also the way that Thomas has treated their own daughter, the way that Thomas treats Rona, all of that stuff shows kind of the promise of a journey for Fowler to go from being perhaps like, we see her almost on that hard line of the descendants when she goes to rescue Rona from the was she at a nunnery?
Yeah, the convent.
The convent place. She absolutely berates her for getting pregnant by a human man.
Yeah.
But then you start to see her on this pathway.
Yeah. And I think that, like, as she progressed along that journey, that's when I start to like her more as a character. Because at the start, she's disconnected from it all. Yeah, she's got the tragedy of Aoife dying, but, she still went along with what Thomas said was the right thing to do. And she always feels bad about it. But yeah, it had to progress more for me to be like, okay, I'm going to relate to you more now. But everything you said is true. And I think her arc is better. Like, Gormla is more stuck. She doesn't progress a huge amount in terms of like her character development. She is still the same greedy, grasping person that she was at the start of the book.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is she's given opportunities to reflect and grow and progress, but she kind of veers away from them. She's still willing to just like think, oh, my son's been dead to me and trying to sell me off into marriage. And when she watches Ongwen drown in the water and just have a moment of reflection there would be good. Like the person being trapped in a marriage, all she wanted was survive, but really what she wanted was to go home. And arguably maybe it's because Gormla doesn't have a home. She isn't, feel like she's really based anywhere because she's always going to have to move on.
So I think one of the themes, whether you got this as well, is around like family and the effect it has on your decision making. Because like Gormla, you know, she's going to live much longer than, you know, the average human. I got the sense that the lifespan of the Fomorians was the same as the descendants. Like,
yeah, seemingly, like maybe the descendants are more immortal because, like, you know, her mother Ethlyn lived for 300 years.
Yeah.
But she seemed to imply that was, like, you know, not enough. That was a bit short for what she was expecting. So, but, you know, so the Fomorians are at least a few hundred years.
yeah. And so you've got this power, this really long lifespan. You know, she's incredibly beautiful. You know, she's always more beautiful than the next princess on the up. And really, she could go find some rich husband or just like find her own wealth somewhere through her immortality and go and have a nice, easy life. But she keeps getting dragged into this absolute kind of nonsense politics of Dublin and Leinster and all of that stuff.
It's how she was raised by her mum. It's how she continues to be influenced by her brother, you know, and they've got this mantra of marry, breed, move on, but they're really not doing it. Like, Melmorda doesn't have any kids. You know, Gormla has one son. It's like, why aren't you doing the whole thing you keep saying? Like, you're not. Like, you keep, like, all you're doing is trying to hold on to power, which is ephemeral because you're going to be found out. So yeah, you're right. It is this kind of like they're not really facing up to what the reality of their existence is. And there's been this disconnect. Probably the Fomorians are so few in number, they can't pass on the proper teachings. I think Ethlyn kind of regrets not having taught her other children who've all died fire magic. You know, she's like, I should have prepared them better. And so, you know, while they've got this idea of we will ascend to power and our children will rule forever and we will rule forever, they're not really following through on any of it because they're compromised. Gormla, like, as much as she gets annoyed at her son and hates loads of people, and, you know, she repeats to herself, I need to move on, maybe another year, maybe just another 2 years. She does still love her son, her one son, and he's the center of her world, and she doesn't want to leave him behind. And at so many other points where she could have been thinking about herself, and she doesn't want to admit it, but she just is so beholden to her son. It's that kind of almost classic thing you see in like ancient history as well as medieval, where there's the mother of the young king who's just like, no, he needs to be influenced by me. And it's that mix of, is it for your own power? Is it because you just can't let him go and you'll always be his mum? And, you know, there's a kind of like almost slightly strange relationship between the two of them, you know, where she seems to love him above any other man that she could possibly love.
But yeah, like, I think it's one of my sort of pet peeves, perhaps, in the fantasy genre of like having people who aspire to power for the sake of power in that quite caricature-y, you know, evil. And they're not really depicted as evil. They're just kind of power hungry. But like, I think we know through the history of kind of despotic rulers that even dreadful people have their own kind of belief system and ideology, and I don't ever get a sense of that from Gormla, from Melmorda, or anyone. It's just like, we just want to be in power because that seems to be the in thing right now. Anyone who's anyone is a king of Ireland.
I wonder if you've hit upon something quite interesting that's an issue with this book, because it's bound by historical events. You've got these evil and good mythical creatures who've been put into this story. And of course, making it grey, like I say, works. But does it rob them of their motivations? Because, you know, the Fomorians are power hungry, and you're asking the question, to what end? I don't know. Is that showing the futility of it all? Or is it just saying, well, yeah, she's chosen these two characters of Gormla and Melmorda to be the two who are the Fomorians, but because she has to follow what happened in history, it could sometimes seem counterintuitive for their achievement of these ends of power for what? You know, maybe there'll be some kind of reflection in the following books where Gormla goes, why am I doing all of this? You know, I'm just doing what my mum told me, what my brother keeps telling me to do, And why am I doing it? I'm not
Yeah,
happy.
but I mean, she could go off to Scandinavia by the sounds of things and
Go get with Olaf.
Yeah.
He's keen on her.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's kind of one slight bugbear, and just another. I guess like slight frustration for me was that I guess we had these two main characters that at the very, very end of this book, spoilers, everyone, like ever so slightly come into contact with each other. And I think I was a bit frustrated that we didn't get some interaction between them. And I wonder whether this falls into our long-standing frustration of trilogies where there's an assumption made about our willingness to read on to the next book.
It's interesting because, and this was something you brought up before we started recording, and it hadn't occurred to me that was a problem until you said it. Because I'd been kind of like, well, they're bound by the historical events. They could probably push them together a bit more. But you're right, it is weird that the two characters didn't say more than like, maybe at one point she was like, give me a drink, or out of my way. And that was about it. And that's, considering, you've got the two sides of it. So you've got, the King of Dublin and the King of Munster, and they're two parties getting brought together only until really towards the very end of the book. And did Shauna Lawless kind of go, there's no way I can really get them to do it, but to have that little sizzle of them now being in the same place. Because I wasn't expecting their stories to intertwine. At least in the blurb, it doesn't say that these two characters are going to meet. It makes it sound like there are these two groups, these organizations, these two, bloodlines of beings, the Fomorians and the Descendants, and they're going to interact, but it doesn't guarantee these two. I guess it kind of just implies that, well, if we're following these two, they should interact. But yeah, it never felt like a guaranteed thing. And you know what? It probably would have annoyed me more if they'd have had a more kind of interaction beginning of the relationship at the end of this book, because it makes sense to me to have that start in the second book. And I think that makes it feel a bit more complete with this one, because we've had it lead up to that battle. The new alliance has been formed. She's married to Brian, and Citric is married to one of Brian's kids. So there's going to be maybe some more kids on their way, the next generation, something that's potentially going to, tear the loyalty of Gormla, because she's going to have a new child, maybe even a new son, and, be like, oh, Citrix betrayed me. So going to that usual bugbear that I have, I didn't feel that so much with this book. I felt like they'd wrapped up sufficiently, like there'd been the big battle. It wasn't like there'd been delayed gratification from saying like, oh, the big battles are coming, or there's a big evil are coming. There was just the right level of Fowler is now in with with Brian Boru and Mercer, and she's just starting to question. It's not like I guess it just didn't feel like storylines were starting at the end of this book. There was arcs being completed.
Yeah. I guess, I do agree with that. I think I just sort of hoped for some,
because you're right. Other than
crossover,
Thomas coming in at one point, all we had was Raoul dying at the start, and that being relayed by Ethelyn, at the Amlav's funeral, and the whole thing about if the blurb it ends up being quite misleading there, because it's trying to say the Fomorians and Descendants are going to fight, and it's all about them being hunted, and none of that really happens.
And this is where it being a sort of historical fantasy is an interesting one, because I haven't read a historical fantasy before. Did you get a sense of that time passing? Because we do have like these big chunks of time, and I think I've mentioned the sort of the Downton Abbey problem in the past, where it's like they live in the same house but they haven't spoken to each other for like 3 years at a time. and I think especially with Fowler's side, it almost felt like all of the things that happened were like one day to the next.
Yeah, you're right. Gormla felt more based
because
in
she
time.
goes off to England and
And Orkney and
like all of these things, and you can get a sense that she's gone off, she's had to stay away for a year or 2 years or something, and then come back.
You're right.
Like, but with Fodor, I was like, I feel like this is just like she spoke to Murky yesterday. He's come over again today. So I'm getting this like romantic chemistry almost thing happening between Merker and Fowler, but actually then when I think about it, I'm like, oh no, he's really not paying her very much attention at all. Like
only towards the end I feel there's a little bit more where he's like, you really are a good person. She's you're not terrible.
I think overall, like, it is. I think we've sort of picked some holes in this, but I think I'm coming from an angle of not being entirely certain what I should think of a historical fantasy, because I really like the fact that it's attached to real historical events, and I feel like I've actually learned a lot of really interesting things.
Weirdly, one of the few other historical fantasies I read was also based in Ireland.
Oh, really?
Years ago, it was set post-Norman invasion, so like Strongbow coming over and causing all the problems. It was terrible, awful series of books. So I was really glad to read another one that completely changed it up, because that one was more about like fairies and like the fae folk, and I really had high hopes for it. It was absolute trash. So I was really enjoyed it, but I'm trying to think if I've ever read any more historical fantasy. I'm sure I have. Nothing's coming to mind. It's just because that one was such a direct comparison. Final thoughts on this book. It's a classic thing for a bit of, you thought I was dead reveal. Is Ethelyn still alive? I know they make a whole thing of like, oh, she's old and withered and stuff now, and she's not got long left. But because we know that the Gobnat did magic on Fowler to make her look old and withered and hideous, is there some chance that Fomorians could have done that kind of magic as well? Because of course she does know more magic than Gormla, ever knew, because
and she mentions how it was very sudden that she grew old, doesn't she?
I think that seems to be the way it goes.
Yeah. Well, that's her explanation of it.
Yeah.
But is it? Is that the way it goes?
Also, I think, which is, as a general observation, I think it's really interesting how they put so many mentions of slavery into this, of like, to show partly the cultural connections that Ireland had as a result of their trading and also the Viking raid. You had people from like, North Africa and Spain, people from all over. And I think there was just a kind of like a nice bit of world building to remind you that Ireland wasn't completely isolated at this point. There were continental trading routes. For centuries all around this time. And I thought that was a really nice little bit. And then finally, Melmorda, he's kept some of the poison. That's surely got to come back.
Yeah, all interesting points, and especially the slavery one, which also is a great mechanism for showing that Brian Boru is a kinder, more gentle king than
we don't have slaves here.
Yeah, like freeze the slaves. It's your classic, you should like this character, you should cheer for this character sort of thing, and it works. So I think my final thoughts, I guess hopes for the next one, are that we get more of Rona. I think hope that there's some kind of inclusion of her. I feel like she's a more interesting character. And has, an interesting story to tell. I wasn't like immediately compelled to jump into book 2 of this, I have to say.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a big fan of grim, dark fantasy. I mention Joe Abercrombie all the time. This is like Joe Abercrombie without the laughs. There's interesting characters, but...
I found that I read this in 2 stages. Initially, like the first 80 pages, and then took a pause of a few days where I started to read something else, and then was like, no, back to this, and then I got rolling with it, and then I finished the rest of the book in about a week. Yeah. So it had that. Like I say, partly it was my difficulty of getting to relate to Fowler, who's supposed to be like the protagonist, the good one. And I think it was once I started to relate to her more, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, let's see how she's doing. You know?
Absolutely. So, enjoyed it. And it's always good to read something that feels a little bit different. And I think this did feel different to anything we've read.
Yeah. Would you recommend it to someone?
I think it would be very specific as a recommendation. If someone said, I'm looking for like an entry into fantasy, I'd be
I'm
like,
looking for
probably
some historical fantasy set in 10th century Ireland. Do you know any? Wow.
that exact, that person I would recommend it to. But I think it's like a tough sell as a first entry into it. But if someone was saying, I'm into any
Historical fiction.
And
as historical fiction, it opens up a time period that not a lot of people consider. And I'd say if it was just straight up historical fiction, get into it. It's a good read because you expect that kind of you say the grim dark fantasy. Like you kind of expect this with historical fiction. Like the events are grey and murky, and you've got there are certain tropes in this that are really reminiscent of lots of historical fiction I've read, like Bernard Cornwell and things like that, where it's like some minor characters, and every now and again a major figure pops up like Olaf and being like, hi, I'm in the story. And you're like, oh, it's a celebrity. So I think I would recommend this to someone who read historical fiction. I don't think I'd recommend this to someone who reads fantasy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's a good summary.
And in terms of getting involved in the world, I mean, bit brutal. 10th century Ireland.
But you've got a pretty good chance of being king.
Yeah.
So,
marrying a king
for a couple of days before you get killed. So, swings and roundabouts. But no, probably not. It's probably not top of your sort of holiday destinations. 10th century Ireland.
As much as I've criticised them, the one place I would like to be is probably Fennet Island. God, be quiet, peaceful life.
Yeah, maybe if you were living in Munster under good old Brian Boru with his.
I know I wouldn't be a slave there. I'd be free.
Exactly. So. Probably not on balance. Yeah, so we'll wrap up there. And if you've read Shauna Lawless's Children of Gods and Fighting Men and you have an opinion on it, then we'd love to hear from you, whether you're watching us on YouTube, if you want to comment down below, like, subscribe, etc., do all that stuff. And if you just want to reach out on social media, we'd love to hear from you. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, at Escapist Anonymous Pod, all one word. Yeah. You'll find us there. Just drop us a message. Maybe recommend us some other historical fantasy. Yeah. Or, just another area of kind of like stuff that's based on a certain time in history that might be worth checking out. Because, of course, our other previous book, The City of Brass, very much based on, Middle Eastern culture. I'd always be looking to learn more about another historical culture's basis for fantasy. Some more myths and legends of those different areas. That can be kind of interesting. Yeah, definitely. We'd love to hear from you, so do reach out. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode. And all that's left to say is goodbye from me. And goodbye from me.